Hello and welcome. And thank you, Heather, for being here today at week one of the Resilience Reset sprint. 4 weeks to get you on that path to thinking and feeling how you want to. So today is a bit of for some people, it's a bit of a recap of bits and bobs around the brain, talking a bit about the neuroscience, the plasticity side of things. So as I said, some of this might be a recap for some people, but others it might be completely new too. I'm going to literally just talk through this. There is a slide or two that I will share, but other than that, basically just got me talking as I kind of go through these bits and bobs. If you're watching this on replay and you have any questions at all, feel free to get in touch and give me a shout, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So, here we go. As I said, I'm going to talk about the brain. I'm going to talk about the brain in a way that is very simple, but hopefully helps people understand exactly what is going on behind the scenes, why we react, why we feel the way that we do sometimes, and why it can keep us stuck where we are. And it sounds a bit strange why the brain would do this to us, but my hope is that as I go through this, you kind of get a little bit more understanding of why we can sometimes have that battle in our brains, from our logical brain and an emotional brain. And that'll come together as we kind of progress through this morning. Won't be too long, so please grab your cuppa if you haven't already got it. Can make yourself comfortable. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in and ask. So, the way I talk about the brain, I split the brain into two parts. We've got old brain and we've got new brain. New brain is your logical day-to-day thinking brain. And as awful as it is, I'm not really interested in that at the moment. It's the old brain of ours I'm interested in. That old emotional brain that I refer to it as. And why do I refer to it as the old brain? Because it's the part of our brain that developed first. And I'm talking history of man. So if we go all the way back to the cavemen times, that's the part of the brain that we had. And rather than that part of our brain sort of growing and developing with us, we've ended up with sort of new brain kind of slapped on top of it. So it's still working in a very, very primitive way. It has two roles in life, procreation and survival. It doesn't really give a numpties about anything else. It wants you to survive, and it wants you to spread the world with human beings. We've got plenty of human beings out there, so that's not quite as important as it maybe would have been back in the caveman times. But the urges and all that sort of a thing are absolutely still there. And yes, we do have a little bit more control over them in a sense because we've got things like birth control and all that sort of a thing. So I'm parking that to one side because we're not interested in that bit. It's the survival bit that we're interested in. That old brain of yours wants to keep you living and breathing. It wants to keep you alive. And as silly as this might sound, but it'll do it in any way possible. Any way it feels fit to do it, it will do it to keep you living and keeping you breathing. So, when I talk about the old brain, I talk about it a lot in relation to anxiety, panic, fears, phobias, all those sorts of things, because I think it highlights the way our brain is working easier than talking about it a little bit more just general. Because at the end of the day, when I'm talking about anxiety, panic, fears, phobias, I might as well be talking about overwhelm, stress, all those uncomfortable feelings that we kind of get on top of us in business and can feel like they're squashing us down. Because that's, in a sense, what anxiety can be like. It squashes us. So to me, it doesn't matter what word describes your emotional yuck. As I said, it could be stress, it could be overwhelm, it could be anxiety. I don't know. It could be overthinking. It could be worry. I don't know. To me, it all comes under that same umbrella of an emotional response that doesn't feel very nice for you. So let's have a chat about that old brain of ours. The old brain of ours. There's three interests. No, before I go into that bit, I think most people are aware of the fight, flight, and freeze responses. And just very quickly, if you're not, fight, it does what it says in the tin. It gets you ready to stand up and fight. Flight, that's the run for the hills, get me out of here. I don't want to be in this situation. And then we've got the freeze response. I just want to quickly mention the freeze response for a moment because the freeze response would not have been around all the way back in the caveman times. Because if the freeze response was around, then as awful as this might sound, we probably wouldn't be here now. Or there definitely wouldn't be as many of us. Because if we froze when that big brown bear came running at us, we'd have been eaten. So the freeze response would not have been around back then. It sort of developed as our brain has developed. So what's going on with that freeze response of ours? So our old brain is like a sponge and absorbs everything that we experience. And if you imagine it a little bit like a computer, just pops everything into a file. And the old brain doesn't have any logic when it does that. And I'll come back to that in a few more moments. So in the freeze response, what's happening, what's going on? And I always give a very quick example. We've got a lady, she's going home after work. It's a bit dusk outside, and she's got her laptop case with her handbag with her. And bless her, she gets mugged. In that moment, she freezes. And the argument is, what's the point in that? That isn't really very helpful. To freeze in a moment like that isn't helpful. Why isn't she screaming? Why isn't she shouting? Why isn't she running away? Why isn't she trying to do something to kind of help that moment? But bless her, as I said, she ends up freezing. So what's going on that old brain level of ours? Basically, what that old brain is doing is looking for a reaction response of what to do in that moment. So it's going through that filing system of going, okay, so when was the last time I was mugged? Now, bless her, she's never been mugged before. So it can't find a reaction or response of what to do in that moment. So the next step it goes to is okay, so what have I experienced that's similar to this? Now, this lady's never had a fight in her life before. So again, it can't find a reaction or response of what to do in that moment. So it goes, okay, just freeze. I don't know what to do, so just freeze. Now, again, we can argue that's not helpful. And why doesn't our logical brain kind of go, scream, shout, run for the hills? Yeah. Because our old brain, our emotional old brain, is coming from that survival part of our brain. So it's stronger. It's a lot stronger than our logical day-to-day thinking brain, our new brain. So basically, when it decides on a reaction or response to something, it wins hands down. So this is why people end up freezing and can often give themselves a little bit of a hard time afterwards going, why didn't I scream? Why didn't I shout? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? Because the emotional old brain of ours is so much stronger than our logical day-to-day thinking brain. So that's just a quick example sort of how strong that old brain of ours is, that we find it very, very difficult, if not impossible, to override it in extreme scenarios and extreme situations. There's three interesting things about that old brain of ours. It has no level of logic. It's got no sense of time. And it's also working earlier than you're consciously aware of. So let's have a look at those in a little bit more detail. It has no logic whatsoever. And the easiest way to look at this is through fears. Now, we're only born with two fears. Fear of loud noises and a fear of falling. They are the only two fears that we're actually born with. So if you think about all the different fears out there, they're learned somewhere on the timeline of that person's life. Now, I went to school with a lass who was absolutely petrified of cotton wool. Yep, you heard me correctly, cotton wool. What is the point of being petrified of cotton wool? It is not going to grow teeth and eat you. It is not going to harm you in any way, shape, or form. But she was absolutely petrified of it, absolutely hated the stuff. Again, no level of logic in that whatsoever. But also, there's a heck of a lot of people here in the UK that are absolutely petrified of spiders. Now, again, we can argue, what is the point? What is the point? They're not venomous here. Yes, we do have some good sized ones, but they're not venomous. They're not going to hurt us. They're not going to harm us in any major way. So why are so many people absolutely petrified of them? Because logical brain can go, come on, girl, pop your big girl pants on or pop your big boy pants on and let's just get on with this. But that's the logical brain. The emotional brain, the old brain of ours, somewhere on the line, for that person has learnt that spiders are bad. And as awful as this is, kind of goes in the bad file. I often refer to the old brain having a bad file. Anything that goes in that bad file is quite seen as a threat to your survival. And I know that might sound a bit ridiculous and a bit OTT, but that old brain of ours has no level of logic. So it can't counterbalance what's happening and what's kind of going on in that moment. So as I said, old brain, no level of logic whatsoever. It also has no sense of time, or doesn't have the same sense of time as our logical day-to-day thinking brain does. So the moment that you're triggered by something, especially if it's uncomfortable, as far as that old emotional brain is concerned, it literally happened a moment ago. Now, let's just explain this in a little bit more detail and keep it really simple. Music. So, little example here. You're driving along in the car and you're listening to the radio or your favorite playlist, whatever it might be, and that song comes on. That song that you remember from, let's say, for example, that concert that you went to when you were 18. It's a great song. You really enjoy it. But when you hear it, excuse me, when you hear it in that moment, literally, you're there and you're back at that concert. You're having a great time. You remember who you were with. You remember what you're doing. You might even remember things like what you were wearing and what was going on. Because the old brain, there's a saying, what fires together, wires together. So if we go back to that concert that you were at when you were 18, obviously very hypothetical here, in that moment of that song coming on, your senses, boom, fired into action. This tune's amazing, fantastic. Woohoo! All of your senses fired into action. And everything in that moment now gets wired into that moment. So not just that song, but all your feelings, what you were hearing, what you were sensing, what you were seeing is all wired into that moment. And that is absolutely fine when it's something nice and positive. However, when it's something uncomfortable, this is where it really isn't very helpful at all. Because in the here and now, we can experience discomfort and boom, in a split second, in our old kind of emotional brain, we can be transported back to a situation similar to that. But the problem with that is that it can end up with an accumulation effect. So if I just keep it simple around spiders once again, now, 25, still absolutely petrified of spiders. You come across a spider, you walk into a room, there's a spider in the top corner. It's nowhere near you. But in that moment, you go, you get me out of it. All that yuck happens. It's not just that moment. It's all the other moments where you've come across spiders in a horrible way. There might be that time when you found one in your hair. There might be that time when you picked up your shoe and it shot out from underneath it. All those situations are all accumulating in the here and now. So what it can do is it can make what's going on in the here and now a lot more uncomfortable than it necessarily needs to be. And as I've said, that's on that simplistic level of a spider fear. But it doesn't matter whether it's overwhelm, whether it's worry, whether it's anxiety. Let's say, for example, you've had a little bit of a poor month and your brain is going, oh my God, I can't pay the bills, I can't pay the bills, I can't pay the bills. It's going back to all those scenarios and situations. And it might even be that there was something happened when you were young and you heard mum or dad worrying about paying bills. We've got all of those scenarios and all those situations that are now coming together in the here and now. And it might have just been a poor month. It wasn't a really, really bad month. It was just a poor month. But that's how the accumulation effect can make what's going on in the here and now feel and seem more uncomfortable than it necessarily needs to be. And this is all happening in the background. And actually, it's also all happening earlier than you're consciously aware of. And it's about half a second. That old brain of ours is working, give or take, about half a second earlier than we're consciously aware of. And again, another little example here. It's a great example to highlight it, but it's not a very nice example. But if you were to step out in front of a car, you don't have to have a thought process that goes, oh, red car coming, better move. Because by the time you've had that thought process, you've probably been squished. You step back instantly, and then you have that moment of, oh, shucks, that was close. Because that old emotional brain of yours sees the threat, responds instantly to it. You don't have to think about it, it just responds. And then that moment of, oh, shucks, that was close. That's that logical day-to-day thinking brain catching up with what's happening, what's going on. So that old brain of yours is working, give or take, as I said, about half a second earlier than you're consciously aware of. So when it comes to uncomfortable feelings related to other things, they are all beginning half a second earlier in your brain. And again, this is what makes it very difficult to stop because it's traveled the equivalent to 50 meters worth of neural pathways in your brain before you become fully aware of what's happening, what's going on. So anxiety and panic is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to stop in its tracks. So stresses, strains, discomfort, overwhelm, again, can all be very difficult to just go, stop. I don't want to feel this. Will you just go away? Because the neural pathways are already underway for that uncomfortable feeling. And don't get me wrong, you can learn tools and techniques to calm them down. But to stop them in their tracks is pretty much impossible. I'm hoping that all makes sense so far. A couple of extra things to kind of add in around this old brain of ours, and that's imagination and catastrophizing. Our old brain is amazing at going down worst case route and worst case scenario. That's because it's negatively hardwired, which sounds really, really bad. But actually, if your old brain wasn't negatively hardwired, then we wouldn't step back when that red car is coming towards us. We'd all get terribly squashed, and that's really not good. But again, the flip side to that is that it's very good at going down worst case route and worst case scenario. And I think in the business world, we are amazing at doing that. Nobody's going to buy our thing. Nobody's gonna join my email list. Nobody's going to take on board this. Nobody's going to pay me for my services. Oh my goodness me, I'm never going to pay the bills. I'm going to end up on the streets in a cardboard box. And the likelihood of any of that, particularly the streets in a cardboard box, is probably absolutely minute. But the brain is still at times going to go down that route. Now, as harsh as this sounds, but if you can imagine then being on the streets in a cardboard box, the old brain of ours goes, oh, shucks, that's exactly what's going to happen. Because it struggles to distinguish between imagination and fact. Now, just take this a step further. If I was to pop you in a function MRI scanner and I asked you to do something very, very simple, like cleaning your teeth, for example, the same parts of your brain light up as if you're cleaning your teeth. So it just highlights that that brain of ours struggles to distinguish between imagination and fact. So if you're imagining worst case scenario and your brain is catastrophizing worst case scenario, it's either A will happen as far as your brain is concerned, or B already has happened. So it sees all that as a massive, massive threat. So again, just pulling this back to business. If you're in a situation where you're feeling particularly uncomfortable around something, one reason, as I said, it's very difficult to stop that feeling is because your brain is going down worst case route and it's working earlier than you're consciously aware of. The thing is as well, sometimes this can become habit, which really isn't very helpful. Our life is filled with habits. And when most people say habit, they kind of think about the negative habits like the smoking, the drinking, the drugs, blah, 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 blah. But actually, just think about your daily routine. Your morning routine, for example, you probably do the similar thing every morning, no matter whether you're at work or at home or on holiday or whatever it is. Because our brain loves routine, it loves habits. It loves to be able to do things automatically so we don't have to think. The best one of that is driving. Just imagine the first time you got in the car. I mean, you may have been 17. I know I wasn't. It was the first time I got behind the steering wheel properly and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But I'm appreciative that some people get into cars and vehicles earlier. But that first time, you don't know what it is or where it is or how it is. And then I remember being told, stop looking at the gear stick when you're changing gear. I'm like, I don't know where it is. It's down there somewhere. But as the lessons progressed, I was actually changing gear without looking. This is great. I'm progressing. I'm moving forward. And what's happening is that old brain, that emotional brain of ours, it's beginning to become automatic. We don't have to think about it. And that is exactly where we need to be when we don't want to waste energy on other things. I know it sounds terribly simple, but think about walking and talking. Once upon a time, they were hard. Now we just do it. Don't even think about it, we just do it. But if we had to think about it, that would take a lot of our energy. And we would expel and use a lot of energy just doing the simple, ordinary, everyday things. Again, not a good use of our energy around these things. So, habits. Our brain can get used to being uncomfortable, which sounds a bit strange and a bit weird, because our brain goes, well, you're alive here. You're living and you're breathing, so this must be okay. The problem is as well, we can get completely stuck in that because people go, yeah, but just do this, just do that, go over it. Grass is greener on the other side, if you just did it this way or just did that or just whatever, whatever, whatever. But the problem is that old brain of yours doesn't know if that works for you, doesn't know if you can actually live and breathe there. Where you are right now might feel uncomfortable at times, might be certain things that really aren't very nice, but it knows you're alive here. It knows you can survive here. But the problem is, it's not where you want to be. And that's where the retraining, rewiring of your brain comes in. Because It's all about getting you feeling how you want to feel. And when you can feel how you want to feel, life flows easier. Even if you come across the most stressful situation in life, if you can feel more comfortable in yourself, you can then access the logical brain, which then helps you to work out what you need to do in that moment. And that is exactly where we need to be. We need to be in that place where we can feel the way we want to feel. We can access the logic when we need to. But also, when we're feeling the way that we want to feel in business, we can access the creativity. Just take a moment for me and just think about the last time that you had a really good idea for your business. The likelihood is that you weren't actually sat at the computer. The likelihood is you were maybe in the shower, going for a walk, doing a mundane task, whatever it might be. But if you think about it in that moment, you felt comfortable, you felt safe, you felt calm, your nervous system was regulated. When we're not regulated, when we're feeling stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, worried, whatever it might be, we're in that fight flight mode. And that is exactly where we don't want to be for business growth. Business growth, as I said, we want to be able to access the logic and the creativity. We want the creativity for the ideas. Then we need the logic to help us work out whether that idea is a good idea or not. Because sometimes in life we get these wild ideas and we go, nah, that's not going to be quite so good. Great idea, but it's not going to be good for me. And then we need the logic to be able to put it in place to do what we need to do. So you can have all the planning and all the strategy in the world. But if that old brain of yours isn't on side and working with you, this is where the downfall happens. Just working harder, just getting more strategy, just having more plans. Yeah, it might help a little bit, but it isn't really going to help in the bigger picture of things. And also, if you just work harder, what does that lead to? We all know it leads to burnout. All know it leads to burnout. It isn't sustainable. So when you've got your old brain thinking and feeling how you want, it's on your side. Your nervous system is more regulated, so you can access as I said, the creativity and the logic that you need and that you want. As I said before, I just want to share my screen just for a moment, just for a couple of slides. I didn't want to do a massive slideshow because sometimes we can, death by slideshow, as I say. I'll just put it in present mode and then it'll make it a little bit bigger. There we go. This is a slide from one of the talks that I do. And as I mentioned before, the fight and flight mode, that basically puts our brain into that stuck mode, that mode, that really kind of, whatever you want to call it, a scared mode, that stress mode, that overwhelm mode, that fear, whatever it might be. And we can't access the logical brain. And we can't access the creativity brain. And this is where you need to be in business, not burn out in this situation, absolutely wearing yourself out and trying to do everything for everybody. And I'm talking a lot of business stuff here, but it could be home life as well. This is not exclusive. Home life and business bleed into each other. If you try and keep them separate, hey, great, doesn't always happen. Because if you have a stressful morning, you take that into work. So it's not about one or the other. It's about getting you feeling the way that you want to feel. So yeah, if you're not in burnout, again, you can access the creativity and the logical parts of your brain. Oh, yeah, it's not just about working harder. We know that working harder could lead to burnout. And that's basically what that slide is saying there. And I've already mentioned that. But this is, oh yeah, this is the slide. This one and the one after it are the last two that I want to share with you. This is a little video that represents the neural pathways in our brain. And our neural pathways can absolutely be rewired and can be changed and can be tweaked and can be adjusted. And that is exactly the way I work with people. We start to rewire that brain of yours so you're thinking and feeling the way that you want to. And the next slide on, I've popped this in here because I think it's a good graphic. A lot of therapies work what we call top down. So it's working with what I refer to as the logical day-to-day thinking brain and expects that to then seep down into what I refer to as the old emotional brain, which is fine. But the problem is sometimes with that is it takes time. Imagine learning again how to drive. That took a bit of time. It didn't just happen within 2 sessions, 3 sessions, or lessons, I should say. So it's not sessions, lessons. Suddenly you're driving and everything's wonderful, amazing, and fantastic. It takes time. Now, if you have got something that is causing you huge overwhelm, facing it in this logical brain is very difficult to do because when emotion takes over, logic gets kicked out. It's simple. You can't access the logical brain. So if you're learning it in this logical new brain, how do you expect this brain to access it? Because your brain does not communicate top down very well. It does over time, but it takes time. Whereas therapies that I use, one of them is called BWRT. It works what we call bottom up. So it's working directly with that old emotional brain of yours that is responsible for what's happening, what's going on. Gets you moving forward much, much quicker. Stop share. One more thing I just want to add in before we kind of pull today to an end. Something that the old brain really struggles with as well is seeing you in the future. Now, bear with me for a moment here because that sounds a bit strange. Unless you do work on it, your brain struggles to see you in the future. So, as I said, take a step further. Function MRI scanners, I'm coming back to them again. They put people in function MRI scanners and ask them questions. The first question that they asked them was, imagine yourself. Certain parts of the brain lit up. The next question that they asked was, imagine a stranger. Different parts of the brain lit up. Then they asked them to imagine themselves in the future. Yep, you guessed it. Stranger brain lit up. And it highlights that we struggle to see ourselves in the future unless we do something about that. And that can be as simple as imagination. Imagination is extremely powerful. As I said, the brain struggles to distinguish between imagination and fact. So you can use imagination in a really, really powerful way if you wish to. And if you want to, sports people, musicians, they'll imagine themselves running the most perfect run, hitting the most perfect ball, playing the most perfect piece of music. And when they physically do it, their body is just catching up with what's happening and what's kind of going on and what the brain already knows. So it's not just about getting you feeling the way that you want to feel. It's also about starting to think about imagining yourself in the future and what you want and where you want to go and where you want to be. And that, I guess, is where the planning bits can come really helpful because it does start to get your brain to think about future you and where you are and where you want to be. So my hope is that that has helped understand a bit more around the brain, about what's happening, about what's going on, about when you're feeling overwhelmed. You might feel it in similar situations often. It's because that brain has learned that this situation is somewhere where I feel uncomfortable, somewhere where I get stressed. The end of the month when you're tottering up your finances, and that uncomfortable feeling is there. Or going live, being in front of people, posting on social media, being visible. Again, the brain goes, oh, it's too scary, don't do it. And it can very much end up sabotaging you moving forward. My hope is, as I said, that that makes sense. And moving forward over the next sort of couple of 3 weeks, we will start to get your brain thinking and feeling how you want it to, rather than how it's learned to. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. And if you have any questions, you will be able to contact me and ask those questions. Thank you for listening and take care for now. Let me just find the